Hello and welcome to this week's Fully Charged Show podcast. This podcast has been brought to you by the Fully Charged Live Show, an annual festival and celebration of electric vehicles, clean technology, informative talks, discussion panels and demonstrations, with thousands of test drives available from many electric vehicle manufacturers, plus of course electric bikes, electric classic cars, and music, food and a wonderful family atmosphere. Don't miss the Fully Charged Live Show at Silverstone Racing Circuit on June the 7th, 8th and 9th of June 2019. For more information and tickets, please go to fullychargedshow.co.uk/fully-charged-show-2019. This week it is just me, or more or less just me, because Johnny is somewhere being driven very fast in something around a very fast motor racing city circuit. Obviously that something is an electric car, and that episode will eventually make it to a screen near you. Now, okay, so I worked that out that I needed to say that right at the top, because I thought there might be some kind of news embargo, but literally just moments ago, Johnny tweeted a short video of the car. So I can say he is currently zooming around the streets of Monaco in an Aston Martin Rapide E, being driven by the Aston Martin official driver, Darren Turner. He's the official works driver, and the Rapide E it's an Aston Martin. It's not going to be slow. Now, I am not saying that this new electric Aston Martin, I mean it's ridiculously expensive, they're only making 150, but it does look pretty amazing, will be on display at the Fully Charged Live Show in a few weeks' time. Okay, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that because I don't know. All I can say is it's not entirely impossible at this point. And yes, it's in the south of the UK, and yes, we're doing a smaller show in Dundee later this year in July. We'll be announcing that soon, which is very exciting because Dundee is the premier city really in the UK with the best charging infrastructure, the best attitudes to renewable energy and electric vehicles. Amazing what they're doing in Dundee. And yes, we're doing one in Austin, Texas soon, but no, wait. We're just waiting for absolute confirmation on the dates on that, so we can't announce anything quite yet, but that is going to be awesome. So, that's enough about live shows. In a moment, there's an interview with an amazing woman I met at the recent Formula E race in Paris. Her name is Sandra Rolling. I think it is Rolling because she's German, but God, you wouldn't know it. God, her English is so perfect. It's kind of annoying. I love it when I meet a German whose English isn't that good. Every now and then you might meet one because they all speak so well. Oh God. Anyway. But she works at the Climate Group as head of the EV100, which is an organisation encouraging big companies to go 100% electric with their vehicle fleets. So it's like, because we always think of, I can't afford an electric car, or I've got nowhere to charge it. There are massive companies in this country that buy hundreds of thousands of cars, not just 10 or 50, hundreds of thousands. And if they go electric, it's that same thing. You want to get those people on board, because that's the majority of cars in this country, as Sandra will explain, are not bought by individuals. The vast majority are bought by fleets. And then they're leased in some way or other, or given out as work cars and all that stuff. But anyway, before that, a couple of dollops of recent news. First, the very rapid expansion of really rapid chargers. This is such a concrete sign of the electric vehicle tipping point. I think we're at it. I really do think we're at the tipping point. You still can't tell because it's still tiny numbers, but the growth is spectacular around the world. So BP, British Petroleum, has just confirmed the rollout of 150 kilowatt polar network chargers on BP forecourts. For those of you outside the UK, a forecourt is a gas station. So they're putting them in now. I've seen a couple already, and they're putting out these 150 kilowatt chargers commencing in July this year. That's like really soon. 400 being installed between now and 2021, and 100 installed at 50 sites by the end of this year. So you're going to start seeing lots and lots of really rapid chargers. These are chargers that fill an electric car in minutes rather than hours. In 15-20 minutes you've got enough to keep you going for a long way. These are really fast, 3 times faster than the common rapid chargers you might see now. And I've just been driving a car that's embargoed until Wednesday, so I can't tell you what it is, but it was very, very nice and surprisingly energy efficient for its size. Anyway, that can take 110 kilowatts in the charger, and you can really see the difference when you plug that baby in. It is very much faster. Just a quick flashback reminder of how things have progressed in the last 10 years, okay? So 10 years ago, when I first drove an electric car, it was a Mitsubishi i-MiEV, an innovative electric vehicle. That was it. It was the Mitsubishi innovative electric vehicle, the i-MiEV. Cute little thing. I loved it. Anyway, at the time I drove that, there was one rapid charger in the UK at the offices of Mitsubishi. One. And it often didn't work because it was built in Japan and no one in the UK knew how to operate it. And if it went wrong, all the instructions were in Japanese. There you go. So that's what it was like 10 years ago. There are now over 14,000 rapid chargers in 8,500 locations in the UK. That's happened in 10 years. And it's very obvious that number will double in the next 5 years. There will soon be well over 28,000, possibly 30,000 rapid charges in more than something like 14,000 locations in the UK. But I'm only talking about the UK there. To put this transition into perspective, there are over 300,000 public rapid chargers in China today. Right now, 300,000 plus, and they are increasing, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, by around 51% a year. So that means in a year's time, there'll be over 600,000. And while I'm talking about China, I think it's worth mentioning BYD. Now, it's not a company many of us are familiar with in the West. We're not constantly seeing headlines about the chairman of BYD or what he's tweeted, like other companies that we might have heard of that produce electric vehicles. If you carried around a mobile phone in the 1990s, the battery will probably have been made by BYD, but they have moved on a bit, and they now make electric vehicles. Not one or two or a prototype. No, seriously, loads of them. They have 750,000 employees that make 50,000 electric vehicles a month. And I'm not just talking cars, although they do make a hell of a lot of them. Electric buses, forklifts, utility vans, street sweepers, garbage trucks, all battery-powered electric vehicles. Now, the buses you might have seen, the buses they churn out are the most familiar to us. There are quite a few around the world. In many cities around the world have BYD electric buses. I saw one in London the other day. However, in China, there are more than 500,000 of these 100% electric buses already on the roads today. Not like we're going to make them by 2030. Today, there's 500,000 electric buses. And when it comes to cars, okay, this statistic blew my brains out. There were more electric cars sold in Shanghai last year than in Germany, France, and the UK combined in one city. Okay, it's quite a big city. But still, that is amazing. Now, we've all heard of the Tesla Gigafactory. Loads of people have flown drones over it, and it is huge, and it's in the Nevada desert, and we're going to go and see it this year, and we're going to do a show about it for Fully Charged. But BYD's battery factory that's already finished being built, is not being built to finish, that produces 30 gigawatt hours of power storage capacity every year. And they've just opened another one of the same size. So in a few months, they will be producing 60 gigawatt hours of power storage capacity every year. And the 10 million square foot facility in Qinghai province was started being built in February. It's already finished because Tesla are also building a massive battery factory in China, which they started, I think, just before Christmas, and that is nearly finished. But the BYD, I don't even understand how fast they can do this stuff. So, we hear endless stories about Tesla, and rightly so, because they've done amazing things. But I think we will start to hear a bit more about BYD in the coming years. And I just love if you've never been on an electric bus, I can't tell you how much better it is than a clattering old diesel one. And how much money the transport authorities save when they transfer over to electric buses. Because imagine what a big bus full of people, how many MPG that gets on diesel. Not a lot. Anyway, another quick flashback reminder of how far things have come, because I saw a display of BYD cars at the Geneva Motor Show about 8 years ago. I'm trying to remember when it would have been, 8 or 9 years ago. And I'll be honest, they all looked a bit shonky. I think that's the right word. A little bit thrown together and possibly a little unsafe by Western standards. They just didn't look like the cars we're used to now. But that is very much no longer the case. Because they looked a little bit like a 1970s Austin Allegro. Now, those of you who are not old enough to remember that or know what that car was, I think it's worth Googling an image of the Austin Allegro. There was a truly dreadful commercial for it where you'd see a man driving this. It was a heartbreaking car. I never had one. I think I must have had a ride in some, but they were pretty awful. There was a man driving the Austin Allegro along a road, and then three women. He stops and three women get in, and they all love him. It's very obvious because he drives an Austin Allegro. It's so crass. It's hard to believe that the human race could produce such nonsense. But there was a song, and the song went, "Allegro's got vroom, miles and miles of vroom." Vroom, V-R-O-O-M, or triple O-M. That was the commercial. Allegro's got vroom. It had about as much vroom as my push bike with a flat tyre. Anyway, BYD cars now look more like an Audi A3 or one of those proper German cars, a Mercedes or an Audi. They really, really improved their manufacturing processes a lot. Anyway, one last car story. The VW ID3. So the heavily disguised car I drove in South Africa last year is arriving, soonish, next year. But VW have opened their pre-order system this week, and they received over 10,000 pre-booking registrations across Europe in the first 24 hours of availability. So there's a lot of interest in this car. It does look very nice. Just think of a Volkswagen Golf, but better and electric, with a really good range and much cheaper. I'll get to that in a minute. But just a bit of perspective on that, because I was kind of dissing Tesla a bit when I was talking about BYD. I mean, let's be honest, Tesla claimed it had 232,000 pre-orders for the Model 3 when they launched it in 2016. But that was worldwide numbers, not just Europe. So VW have done really well, 10,000 in the first 24 hours. Clearly, a lot of people are interested in the ID. It looks like it'll be cheaper with the base model that has a 45 kilowatt hour battery, which gives it a kind of plus 200 mile range without any question, starting at 30,000 euros, which at current exchange rates in this period of enormous economic and political fluctuation is about 25,000 quid. So much cheaper. That's what I'm really hoping they manage to do. And they've said they're going to start at 30,000 euros. There's no point me working out the US dollar cost, because these cars are not going to be available in the USA or North America, only in Europe for the time being. They're also making the same car with larger battery packs. So there's a 58 kilowatt hour mid-range model and a 77 kilowatt hour top of the range. It's all about range, isn't it? But anyway, from what I understand, and it's something I like, other than battery pack size, the cars are all identical. And they are setting up their big manufacturing plant in Zwickau to be two things: a factory capable of producing hundreds of thousands of cars a year, and a factory that is 100% renewably powered. Which brings me on to my little rant of the week. Okay, so Autocar. Some of you will have heard of it, some of you will not. It's a well-respected magazine in the UK, and it recently ran yet another half-baked nonsense article about a tatty report from an obscure university in Belgium, which once again dragged out the dead horse of electric cars and diesel nonsense and beat it just to pulp with an old stick. It is a desperate attempt by the fossil lobby to slow down adoption, to spread fear, uncertainty and doubt to as many people as possible. And this stuff always works. Electric cars are dirtier than diesel. Not true. Self-charging hybrids don't ever need any fuel ever of any sort. Not true. So people believe this stuff. When these comparative studies are done, the one figure that is readily and easily available for the gullible academics to swallow, these stupid people who are paid to churn out this rubbish, that it's tailpipe emissions from combustion cars. Tailpipe emissions from combustion cars, a very reliable source of information. Yeah, we know how reliable measuring tailpipe emissions are, because there's never been any scandals regarding that. the way those tests are done. They're completely 100% above board, as we all know. Nonsense. All manufacturing has an environmental cost. Of course it does. It's so painfully obvious. And their argument is that manufacturing batteries has a high CO2 component, especially, and this is what they say, if those factories are powered by coal-burning power plants or the standard European grid. They are not. And here's why this is such a argument. It is now universally accepted that the cheapest generating method around the world for electricity is solar and wind. What are rapacious capitalist companies that use large amounts of electricity going to do? Choose the expensive, dirty stuff or the clean, cheap stuff? The Tesla Gigafactory will be 100% renewably powered by the end of this year. And we're talking big factory that uses a lot of electricity. The BYD factories in China have opted for renewables because they're cheaper. In these sad little reports, there's no mention of the impact manufacturing internal combustion engines has, or the cars has, the metals extraction and transportation costs, the electricity use in the manufacturing process. And we know with well-established companies that they'll have long-term power contracts that deliver the electricity that they need, and they're not going to come from renewables. No. I mean, they might put a few solar panels on their roof, but it's nothing. You know, it is so token and greenwashing. When you manufacture a diesel engine or a petrol engine, there is a profound, measurable impact. But are they going to release those figures? No, they're not. So don't wait for them. They're not going to tell you. And that is before we even consider the costs in delivering the fuel to these inefficient machines that they make to chug along our roads and poison us with their toxic fuel fumes. Fossil fuel has to be extracted, transported and refined, and those costs are very deliberately and carefully hidden from us. They used to reveal how much electricity they used in refineries around the world. The UN Statistics Division kept those figures until 2005, when suddenly those figures were no longer available. I wonder why. I'll just quickly remind you, the one refinery I went round for a TV show many years ago was very proud in the fact that it used the same amount of electricity as the cities of Leicester and Coventry combined. Two large UK cities use a lot of electricity, as you can imagine, in a year, and so does one oil refinery. Where does that electricity come from? It comes from a coal-burning power plant just up the road in South Wales. Tailpipe emissions are about half the story. Yes, battery manufacturing is an energy-intensive process, but the batteries have a life of between 20 and 25 years. Some people say 30. 10 to 15 years in a car and another 10 as static storage systems in buildings. Batteries being made today could be helping power buildings in 2045, for goodness sake. It's just pathetic. What is great about this article, if you bother to follow the link, and it's because it's a load of old nonsense, is the comments from readers of Autocar who are going, for goodness sake, this is such a rubbish story, and you haven't, you know, there's some clever comments. It's quite interesting, as opposed to what you would expect. I was pleasantly surprised. End of rant. Let's listen to someone who understands the importance of electrifying our ground transport fleet and who is doing something positive, actually positive, to encourage and start that happening in a much bigger way. So please welcome Sandra Rolling, who is the head of the EV100 group. I'll tell you the key thing that you spoke about, which I think I hadn't ever thought about before, was just in terms of vehicle sales, new vehicle sales, who buys new cars? Because we talk to sort of general consumers, I think, on the show, and that's who I think of as, you know, and all the reasons they might not want to buy an electric car, or they're hesitating, or they'd love one but they're too expensive. And then I saw that simple figure you gave, which is the vast majority of new cars aren't bought by private individuals, they're bought by companies.
That's exactly right. That's a number for Europe, but you'd see it comparatively in other parts of the world as well. And
but then does that include things like vans and delivery vehicles? Right, I see. But basically, so the private market is actually a very small section of.
Yes. I mean, you know, and then you have company cars and other bits where it obviously overlaps a little bit. But I think what the opportunity is in that is business can just invest in a different way than a private individual can. They naturally think total cost of ownership. They have, they can think about a period of 3, 4, 5 years. They have leasing contracts. They negotiate in bulk. So I think that's where the business community can come in and really help create some of that early market demand that then puts the prices down for everyone else as well. I mean, if you take a company like BT, they have over 30,000 vehicles, others have 10,000, 5,000, and those are obviously numbers that can really make a difference if the whole market at this point is just over 5 million.
But it is also that very key thing of all the vehicles that do regular, like the post office is a really good example, or delivery companies that will do regular trips. It's such an easy transition to go to electric vehicles.
So actually we have 3 postal companies so far. So we have DHL, we have Swiss Post, we have Austrian Post, and we know from a lot of others that they're already thinking about it for exactly that reason. It's like in the city centres, it's not huge distances, but it's like a lot of stop and go. They are actually more convenient for the drivers. So just in terms of handling
also,
them.
They have a depot where they can, or where they keep the vehicles now, just sitting there doing nothing, and they could be plugged in or helping run the building. I mean, that's that other aspect of vehicle to grid, which I'm just about to start doing at home, is very...
Exactly, and I think the sort of from the perspective of everyone else, city centres is also where, for example, the issue of air pollution and the health concerns is just the biggest. So if we can take some of those fleets that drive around cities the whole day out in terms of emissions, that would be a huge benefit just for everyone around as well.
So can you quickly tell me then about the organisation you work with, Climate 100? Is that... no, correct me. Is that the wrong term?
So my organisation is the Climate Group. We're an international NGO, and we're all about accelerating climate action by creating networks of leaders.
Right, and this is really within businesses. This, in a way, it's a business-to-business activity.
Yes, exactly. So we run what we call corporate leadership initiatives, and this EV100 initiative is one of them. And that's all about bringing businesses together to say we want to be a force in changing the market, and to invite them to make public commitments, in this case to go electric by 2030. So that's switching their own fleets entirely to electric and putting in charging infrastructure at all their premises by 2030. And it's all about moving the timeline forward and going ahead with some of the businesses that are saying we've seen enough, we believe in the technology, we're just going to make the effort now because we think it's the right thing to do, and it will be the right thing for our future as well.
I mean, in your general discussion, I'm almost more interested in hearing the negative response from businesses because I wonder what that, because I've spoken to businesses that are absolutely keen and their public commitment is very clear. But I'm just wondering, when you go to see, I don't even know, a company X, and they've all got diesel delivery vans and diesel cars, and the boss likes his Ferrari or whatever. Do you get that kind of going, they're rubbish, they don't work, we don't want to change?
To be honest, surprisingly little comparatively. So I mean, there's obviously a continuum, from the most ambitious to the ones that sort of like to take a bit more conservative view. But I think the biggest spectrum I see is when the companies that are already doing some of it or having an interest to try it out, it's what we're asking them to do, of course, is to go all in and really say we're going to make the whole transition by 2030. So that's the conversation with companies, especially if you have a global fleet. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for the different types of vehicles? But I think a very large part of the business community is already thinking about it. I think just recently in the UK there was a study where they asked fleet managers about how many electric vehicles they have in their fleet. It was really interesting to see. I think it was about 50% who had some now, but a very large majority that said they expect for that to be the dominant technology over the next decade. So there's clearly that sense of it's coming. It's sort of just then learning what exactly does it mean, how do I get started, what are my best opportunities for getting that learning and that experience.
Because that's been also a key theory or a key theme that seems to run through a lot of particularly in terms of renewables and electric vehicles, is once people, and particularly companies, see the financial benefits. Because that's, in a way, when I think of when I was involved in renewable energy many decades ago, no one talked about economics. It was all about the environmental aspect or the low impact and all that sort of stuff. But now there's clear economic benefits. I mean, one of your slides showed that the savings that a company can make in terms of electrification of their delivery systems.
Exactly, especially the kinds of fleets that are in operation most of the day, because the calculation you have to make is slightly higher upfront cost, but then the savings you get over time on the fuel, but also maintenance and repair, just because electric vehicles are more simple in a way. And the example I gave in the presentation was DHL. They have their postal vans that saves them 60 to 80% on fuel maintenance and repair, which is amazing.
That is ridiculously enormous, isn't it? I mean,
Exactly.
you think a company might consider a different technology if they're going to save 5 or 10% in a year, but 60 to 80% is just.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's, that story will just become stronger over the next few years, and we're moving to that point where the upfront cost becomes comparative as well.
Yeah.
So BNEF think that might be around 2022 already in Europe, and then it absolutely becomes a no-brainer. You don't even have to make big complicated total cost of ownership calculations.
And then one of the things that I was intrigued by, I think it was Camden Council in London, had some electric vans that they use for servicing their public housing and delivering meals and things. And they had a central depot already, and they were charging electric vehicles there. And it was just one employee who went, "We've got a big roof. Should we put some solar on it?" And they've kind of not done it in a very big way, but they did do that. And then is there ever discussions around that? Because often a big company will have big assets, big buildings that don't have solar on. I mean, I'm always staggered when I see a big building that doesn't have solar on the roof and go, "You own that roof, put some solar on it,"
Absolutely.
And I mean, it is happening now, but it seems to be just a lack of knowledge of the difference that can make.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot of businesses that are already bringing that together. We run a sister initiative, if you will, that's called RE100, that brings together companies who made 100% renewables commitments, and a lot of the members also overlap. So IKEA, for example, have solar panels already on a lot of their roofs. They exactly see that opportunity to charge. I think EDF are another example where they're already doing that. And across the initiative, we have an annual reporting cycle where we're asking members how they're doing, to help us get a sense of how everyone's moving along. And in that, I think 80% of our members said they're already having 100% renewable power for at least some of their charging.
Right.
Not all of them, their own production, but they're all very conscious of the fact that renewables and electromobility obviously need to go together to, get to the full climate impact.
So, I mean, are you generally then optimistic of this particular project? I mean, is it working well? Are you signing up new companies? Is it doing what you want it to do?
It is, yes. I mean, we've been running for about a year and a half now. We have 39 members, and it's really every few weeks we invite some other members to join us, which is very much the intention, because that gives us an opportunity to show people what's happening, to show concrete examples. And we're really seeing a lot of interest from companies to get involved, and from some of the really big fleets as well, which is obviously exciting, because that's what we need to get the full impact.
A key input to that, I always think of, the buses and taxis in London, but actually for every bus and taxi there's probably a couple of vans delivering stuff. They're diesel. So that really, I mean, and that must, or it needs to be made apparent to companies that the population see that as a problem, i.e. they need to change.
Exactly, and I think a lot of companies that sort of take a more evolved perspective on sustainability, they understand that. They look at carbon footprints, they look at other local footprints, and air pollution, I think, is one of those areas that is, that everyone can feel day to day, that, people care about children having asthma and these sort of things, and I think the awareness for how important the problem is really growing. I think it's like over 5 million people every year dying of, air pollution related issues. So that's certainly some things where companies can make a difference, and where they're also already seeing in city centres zero emission zones going up, and where they just need to think about what does that mean to me for my business, and how do I make sure that in the future I can still serve those customers in a way that is less disruptive and just can be more positive for the surrounding society.
But the other point, which I think is interesting to our listeners in particular, is that the amount of people who ask me, can I buy a second-hand electric vehicle? I can't afford a new one, they're too expensive. I'd love one, but they're too expensive, blah, blah, all those things. And I know those will change, because there already is now a thriving second-hand electric vehicle market in the UK. It's still very small, but it does exist, and you can buy a second-hand. But one of the longer-term benefits of companies buying literally millions of electric cars is, though at some point in the future there will be literally millions of second-hand electric cars that are still very serviceable, as we now know.
Exactly, and the positive thing about this is also it's not just at some point in the future, but it's like in 2-3 years' time, because most of the corporate leasing contracts are exactly for that time frame. If I'm a private individual, I might keep my car for 10 years or more, but companies switch them typically every 2-3 years, and at that point then enter the second-hand market. So that's also one of the ways in which business can really help, roll out the market and make it accessible really for everyone day to day.
Well, that's what we've got time for. There are links to all the stories and rants in the show notes. And of course, please check out the Fully Charged live page if you're in the UK or neighbouring EU countries. Yeah, last year many people came from the Netherlands, Denmark and France. And I think they all enjoyed it. What am I saying? No, they loved it. They raved about it. It's going to be wonderful. I'm really looking forward to telling you more about what's going to happen at Fully Charged Live this year, because it is really exciting. And for those of you who can't make it, we are recording all the talks, because there's going to be some amazing talks, and we're releasing them as podcasts, because there's going to be some really top quality interviews and presentations and panel groups. So they're all being recorded and we'll release them as podcasts. If you want to help support this insane project that is Fully Charged, there is we do a Patreon subscription thing, and you can follow the links to Patreon and all that stuff. You know how to do that. And we are incredibly grateful to our amazing, very large now group of Patreon supporters. It really does help. It doesn't cover everything, but my God, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be here. Please do subscribe to this podcast, and if you have watched Fully Charged on YouTube, please subscribe to that. And as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.